I don't expect any of our questions, because they were submitted prior to the session today, are going to surprise us by being more board-oriented, but certainly she's here should any questions come up or for discussion maybe after our session today. Thanks to my fantastic co-chair, Lydia Luz. I think we're going to start the questions, unless there's something else you'd like to add, or you, Reverend Colin?
Well, just thanks all for being here. It's good to see folks and to have the opportunity for a little conversation.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start this off with something that we have been really wondering about for a long time. Are you creamy or crunchy?
I assume that refers to peanut butter.
Yes.
You know, I don't have a strong preference. Is that? Oh, I don't have a strong preference. That's just weird.
Corn or flour?
Corn, definitely corn tortillas. But yes. Yeah, no, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about the peanut butter, but not a strong peanut butter position.
Not a strong peanut butter position. This could really sway things, Reverend. Okay, so, yes. Have to hold the mic. Okay.
Okay.
Lydia.
The first question was, do you like creamy or crunchy peanut butter?
Okay, so let's just do a quick, can you guys hear me now? Okay.
And how's
I'm
this?
going to just keep this one here.
Okay. Because it sounds like it's too loud, but I guess not. Okay.
Thanks, Mary. Reverend Colin, over the past 6.5 years, you have worked for the board. As a settled minister, you would work for the membership in coordination with the board. A couple of questions here. What will be different? And then also, what are you most excited about in a settled ministry with FIRSTUU Houston?
Okay, so, I mean, I think the first question is functional in a way, like what is the difference between a settled and a contract minister, right? And a contract minister works for the board, usually for a determined length of time, around specific goals that the board, hopefully through a process with the congregation, has sort of determined and set as the priorities. And so it's about, I don't want to say short-term fixes, but mid-term sort of fixes and efforts, right? So like this congregation developed 5 developmental goals. Those developmental goals were actually part of my contract in terms of working with the board towards realizing them. We said we made evaluations on whether we succeeded on those things or not. In that model, the board is really truly in charge of the congregation and ultimately responsible for the congregation. Right? The board president is sort of the grand poobah of everything. And so in moving towards a settled ministry, it's an indefinite contract. The minister works for the congregation, not the board, and the congregation really sets the goals and objectives through which, in this case, what we've done through our mission, vision, and covenant, right? And so the minister then works, and I would assume for a congregation of our size and with sort of our polity, continues to work with the board on developing those goals, but ultimately it's really the congregation who's supposed to be telling the minister this is what our vision is, and the minister is sort of working with the congregation to sort that out. The other thing is that technically, and this is important, the board does not actually have the power to hire and fire a settled minister. That resides with a congregation and a congregational vote. So I don't know if you have a follow-up, but that's sort of the, oh, wait, there was a second question.
And what are you most excited about in a settled ministry?
Thanks. And I think if we can go with one question at a time next time, because then otherwise... well, I'm really excited about the sort of point at which First Unitarian Universalist is at, which I think the congregation really is at a moment of transition where we've done a lot of work over the last 6.5 years and are really in a position over the next decade or so to really live into that vision or mission of being a pillar congregation for Houstonians of many faiths. And I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be part of that. And the difference there really in terms of contract versus settled is that tenure, right? So I'm saying, yes, I like this congregation's vision a lot. I want to help build it and make it a reality over many years rather than over, just these sort of time-specific goals. And I would hope that if you call me as a settled minister, I would be here for many years to work with you on those goals. I said, I think in my very first board meeting, that, and maybe it was my second, that for a congregation of First Unitarian Universalist size, if they have a healthy relationship with their senior minister, you would want that person to stay for at least 15 years. And that for a congregation of the size that many people in First Unitarian Universalist aspire for the congregation to be, you would want that person to stay for 20 years or more. Because it's really that kind of length of time working with the congregation, getting to know the community, getting to know the city, that you're able to affect that kind of change and transformation, right? If you just sort of stay in the cycle of contract ministries, you'll just stay kind of flat forever.
I'm going to follow up to the follow-up.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes you ministers assume that we know what things mean.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you to say more about what a pillar congregation is.
Well, so that's an interesting thing to ask me to say more about, because that's a statement that is in the congregation's, it's the it's the mission statement, right? So to some extent, that's actually for the membership or aspiring membership of First Unitarian Universalist to answer. That said, there are certain things that a large center city Unitarian Universalist congregation either should do or must do to just function. And one of them is to be a sort of major civic and spiritual institution, right? So do the sort of work we did last week around gun violence, or are going to do next week around the HISD school bonds, right? Be a real clear prophetic voice that people in the community know is going to stand up for what's right and moral and listen to. It also, I think, means having a vision of being a community of communities and not thinking, the circle of friends that you have is the whole congregation, but actually understanding that there's a lot of different, communities going on. And sometimes I get this a little bit of confusion with people who are in the first service versus the second service, where people will make these kind of blanket statements about the congregation based on the fact that they go to the 9:30 service or the 11:30 service, And so it's really understanding that actually the community is not just who's here at the moment, but it is this wider community that is drawing lots of people into it. I hope that.
Yes. Oh, it is mine, because I asked the follow-up to the follow-up. So this is a question that we asked when the search committee interviewed you, which is, what are your strengths as a minister?
So I think I'm pretty good at most things, and that I think that some of the things that I think I'm pretty good at administration. I think I'm pretty good at fundraising. I think I'm pretty good at what used to be called sort of churchmanship, which is running a congregation, which is really essential for a church of First Unitarian Universalist size. You need to actually have a certain level of administrative and visionary acumen. Basically say, this is where the congregation needs to go, and this is where we're going, and how I think we're going to get there, right? So that, I think I'm pretty good at. I think I'm pretty good at building a collaborative worship team that can offer a lot of different kinds of spirituality, opportunities for spirituality throughout the service. And we have a great music team that I've been involved in hiring, and a great associate minister who I've been involved in hiring. And so I think that, I'm really good at that kind of team building, vision setting. I think that any minister who says that they're a great preacher doesn't know that they need to improve on their preaching, because there's pretty much 3 or 4 great preachers of every generation, and we can't all be that person. So we can aspire to be improving as preachers all the time. And so, yeah, I think I'm a better preacher than I was when I was 30, and I think that when I'm 60, I'll be a better preacher than I am now at 48. But I think I'm pretty good at preaching. Yeah.
So what are the areas, if preaching is one of those where there's a growth, are there other areas that you would like to grow, that you would like to work on?
Well, okay, so I'm going to have a couple of answers to that question, because one of them is an area that actually I would like to grow a little bit, but really isn't my role. And one of the things that I think can be kind of confusing about having a senior and associate minister and of trying to be a congregation of a certain size is understanding that you have different ministers doing different things, right? So I think I probably could be better at pastoral care. I try to go visit people, I try to be, in the loop, and we have a great pastoral round system where we really try to track and keep track of what's going on with everybody in the congregation who needs help. But as much as I could probably improve my bedside manner, so to speak, we have an associate minister who really inhabits that role. And so it's probably not the best idea to sort of focus on, on that kind of strength. I think the thing that I'm thinking about more, and I'm not certain whether this is an area of weakness or strength, but just sort of something I'm kind of thinking about, how can we approach this more, is providing sort of more spiritual direction and spiritual practice and spiritual development from the pulpit. One of the things that as a developmental minister I've had to do a lot of is really goal-oriented, I think that's better, goal-oriented sermons. Okay, we're talking about developing our mission and vision and covenant. Or, I spent almost half the first year I was preaching here talking about the multi-site model and asking the congregation questions about what is your vision for the multi-site model, and how is that going to work or not work, right? So I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to do a lot more sermons that are really focused on kind of spiritual direction and spiritual, invitations to grow your spirituality and transformation from the pulpit, where really, just by what I was hired to do, there's been an awful lot of, we can't really run a church if the administration is a mess, so we really need to spend more time focused on the administration, right? It's hugely important, right? But that's, I think, one of the good things about moving from developmental to settled is that you have to suffer through fewer sermons that are, what is it that you guys want to do with these other campuses? Or what is our process for thinking about governance? I've done sermons on literally congregational governance. I hope not to have to do one of those, well, maybe ever again, but but it is a thing that I've had to do in the role that I had.
I thought that one was really fun.
What?
I thought that one was really fun. Just kidding.
Well, I'm sure that the policy wonks did enjoy it.
Uh-oh, I'm outed. Can you please comment on challenges in balancing the budget this current year? And is there a plan for reducing expenses to avoid a similar situation next year?
So I think the answer to... So as many of you know, there was sort of a potential budget shortfall last year that led to the suggestion that there be a staff reduction. And what happened as a result of that was a new member of the congregation, Sarah Brown Rankin, who's a professional fundraiser for DeCamera, said, I want to help the congregation fill this gap rather than cut the budget. So she is organizing a fundraiser which is supposed to be, and I don't actually fully understand it, so I think it's 7 months from now, so like, we'll wait. I could describe it better at the time, but it's really designed to encourage people that we partner with and in other parts of the community to engage in a fundraising activity. So it's not money coming from our membership, but money coming from the community to raise the sort of fundraising gap. So if that happens, then I don't think we would necessarily have a shortfall, and so that wouldn't be a issue going forward. And if that doesn't happen, then I think we'll have to have a conversation about, did it happen good enough that we want to sort of assume that next year something like that will be more effective? Was it not good enough that we really do need to make an adjustment to the budget? And I just I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen in May when we do, hold this fundraiser. I mean, we are also trying to increase the auction, right? So this year, the auction goal is $45,000, which is a significant increase from what has been historically, but is actually just what we made last year at the auction, right? So it's saying, okay, this is what we made last year. I'd like to see us do $50,000 or $55,000. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is because we've been more engaged with the community, we've been able to get some really wonderful donations. Wendell White, who is the artist who did PhotoFest this past year, he said donate a couple of items. We'll find out what that means, but I mean, he's a very significant artist. And LaBouche, Jarkokovic, who is was in PhotoFest 2 years before that, has also said she's going to donate something, right? And so those kinds of things, I mean, hopefully we'll get some folks from outside the congregation to come bid too, but I mean, those, depending on what they donate, those could bring in a few $100s, a couple $1,000s, right? And I know the auction team is working hard to get other great things.
The next question, when the search committee met with you, you identify yourself, or you really identify yourself as a UU theologian. Thank you, a UU theologian. And how does that work as an academic integrate with being a congregational minister?
I think it works pretty well. I guess the question, so one of the things that I would say sort of to start out with is that the division between the academy and the parish is a very mid-20th century going forward thing. So most of the most significant Unitarian Universalist theologians, people like William Ellery Channing, James Luther Adams, they either spent much of their career in a congregation or actually were the senior minister at Forest Church. Forest Church was the most significant Unitarian Universalist theologian around from, say, 1990 to 2010. He was a senior minister of All Souls, Unitarian Universalist in, I was going to say Washington, D.C., but New York City. And he really felt that actually the pulpit was the best place to do theology from, because if you do theology just strictly from the academy, it ends up being something that is informed by academic conversations as opposed to informed by congregational life. But I mean, the real distinction between religious philosophy and theology is that theology is coming out of and reflecting on congregational and communal life. So what better place to situate yourself to do it than in a congregation? And I've been very lucky that I've been able to maintain, academic connections while I've been here. I've had a non-residential fellowship at Princeton. I've had a non-residential fellowship at Rice, and Oxford has just offered me one, which is pretty exciting. So I'll continue to go back and forth rather than, and I think that makes my work better and my ability to communicate and contribute not just to our congregation, but the whole movement much
So
better.
I'm hearing, so there's a synergy
There's a
between,
real-
between
yeah.
going to the academy and
Yeah,
and the congregation.
There's a real synergy, and if you actually read the most recent article that I published in the Journal of Unitarian Universalist Studies, the last like 4 or 5 paragraphs are really kind of reflecting on what I've learned in Houston and how it connects to this historical figure, Robert Wedderburn, in terms of like bringing his theology into the, the present day. Now it's an academic, journal article, so that's got pluses and minuses, there in terms of who you can communicate to, but like it's that article is actually a pretty big deal because I'm sort of trying to rewrite who our historical resources are as a whole tradition, and saying in the closing paragraphs, here's some of the ways I think that impacts congregational life. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was just at Harvard or someplace like that.
I think that's a great seg into our next question, which is, what role do you see the church playing in the broader community, and how would you foster that connection?
So, I mean, I'm going to sort of focus on kind of what we're doing just right now in some ways, because I think that's the best place to start, and then we can talk about where we might go. But I mean, in the last few years, First Unitarian Universalist has really been able to reposition itself as a major voice in the community. I mean, being involved in sort of 2 significant justice actions over the course of, that have big implications potentially for culture in Texas or the city election, the city HISD elections. I mean, First Church, or First Unitarian Universalist, is looked at as one of the leaders, if not the leader, in the city in terms of talking about how to deal with gun violence. I mean, we have consistently put ourselves out there. This last press conference didn't quite get the media hits that I think we hoped it did, but the previous one had not 1, but 2 articles in the Chronicle family of media, one of which was like a multiple, whatever, page-ish, article pretty much just focused on our work. And, I think continuing to do that kind of advocacy is really central to who we are and what we need to do. And it's, I think it's important to understand that a Center City Unitarian Universalist congregation cannot survive if it is not viewed as a sort of significant civic institution. And that's because the resources required to run even just this building are like pretty substantive. So once you get past the running of this building, then providing programs to, the congregation, I mean, you're talking about a significant budget. And you cannot do that if you're not casting a vision that really matters to the city and drawing people in. Like a sort of more inward-focused congregation is not going to survive long-term in a space like this because of not my choices, and not necessarily even the choices that y'all here made, but the choices that the people who built this building and built these facilities made around, you're going to have, I can't remember how many square feet this whole facility is, but it's, 20 or 30,000 square feet facility, right? So that costs a lot of money to maintain. If you want to have a minister on top of that and you want to have the staff to run it, I mean, you're looking at quite a bit of money before you can really, do stuff. I think the second part of that is really providing, it gets back to that being a pillar community for Houstonians of many faiths. So, I mean, we can't just be thinking about like Unitarian Universalism. We have to be thinking about how do we provide some of the religious infrastructure for the whole city. And when this congregation has been at its best, it's helped start not just Unitarian Universalist congregations, but provided spaces for people who can't find a space to meet, elsewhere, right? So the Houston Zen Center started from First Unitarian Universalist, the Metropolitan Community Church, which is a LGBTQ welcoming congregation, started their worship services in our fellowship hall. First Congregational Church is a daughter church of First Unitarian Universalist. We currently host a synagogue, right? And so, like, really, it's not just about sort of that spiritual need for ourselves, but how do we, as one of the very few faith communities that's truly committed to religious pluralism, nurture religious pluralism, not just for ourselves, but for all of Houston.
So here's it's really a follow-up question, because we talk about the fact that we're not, as Unitarian Universalists, we're not good as evangelicals. We don't usually go out and grab people off the street. So how do you're talking about our role in the community, and we certainly want people to be interested and attracted to us. Can you talk some more about turning that interest into involvement and then into membership, which is so important?
I was thinking, you guys were gracious enough to send me the list of questions in advance, and I was thinking that this is probably the one question that might get me in trouble. So,
I will say it is a question that was asked by one of our members,
Yeah.
So and it makes some assumptions that it's all up to you to grow the membership, and I understand that that's not really a good assumption.
Well, right, and that's why it might get me in trouble, because actually, here's the thing. First Unitarian Universalist does not have an evangelism problem. We have a retention problem, which is to say, we get plenty of visitors. We get so many visitors that if we just kept one visitor that we got every week, we would have a 350 member congregation by the end of the fiscal year. If we kept two visitors that we got every week, and we get definitely way more than 2 visitors every week, we would have an almost 400 member congregation by the end of the fiscal year. Our visitors come here already knowing that they like the worship services because they watch them online. They're not, the questions for the visitors are not like, do I like Colin, or do I like what's happening from the pulpit? The question for the visitors is, do I feel comfortable feeling welcomed in the congregation? And so really the question is, and I think Scott and I will be more intentional, and Margarita, about figuring out how we can coach the congregation on this. But the question is, how do you guys greet and welcome and invite into community life those visitors? Because, I mean, during the election season right now, we're going to get 10, 15, 20 visitors every Sunday. So, like, what is the congregation going to do? And like with this audience, I will give you one hint. Whenever you see somebody new in Channing Hall, go talk to them. I talked to somebody who was here for their 4th time this Sunday after the 9:30 service, and this is going to really potentially get me in trouble. Very nice young woman, 2 kids in RE, said I was the first person who'd talked to her since coming to church. And she was still sticking around because her kids loved the new playground. And I walked her over to 2 other parents and introduced them, and I hope that they, connected and had a great time. But that's figuring out how the congregation can do that is really what's going to grow the church. It's not like whatever sermon I give or whatever Jolie and I are doing a sermon service on the spirituality of Nina Simone in December, and I imagine we will have quite a few visitors for that. But that's not how do I welcome those people, it's what does the congregation, do. So I hope you don't feel too beaten up by that answer, but that is really the
That's a different committee.
What?
That's a different committee. But you can sign me up for that one too, because I do pull in people off the sidewalk because I love it here. Thank you. So we're going to turn a little bit more inward to you and your personality. It's sort of, it feels a little cheeky to say this is time to get to know Reverend Colin, but we are looking to know you from a different angle in a way during this process. So we would like to know, Reverend Colin, what brings you joy outside of work?
Lots of things. My spiritual practice is rooted in sort of textualism, so I have a daily reading practice and a journal writing reflection practice that brings me a lot of joy. And, but beyond that, what are, sort of like a few of your favorite things, right? Like, so I like, no, you do not want me to sing. That is the one thing, actually. So talk about areas for growth. That is definitely an area of growth. Probably my biggest area of growth. So yeah, I like to dance. I like riding my bike. I love art. I love to cook. I love entertaining and having friends over. My cat, right. Cats, yes. My cats bring me a great deal of source of joy. Cat story. We just got, Sade just got these 2 fish to go in her aquatic plants, so we now have cat television. So I'm going to enjoy watching them watch the fish that they can't get to. Bike riding, mushroom foraging, all of those kinds of things. I've talked about some of that stuff in my sermons over the years. Those are things that I enjoy. What? Yes, I like techno music and house music and that kind of thing. That's unfortunately Houston's not the best city for that, so I have to get my fixes when I go elsewhere. But
So this next question is something that we talked about in our interview with you, and it's something that came up when we did the canvas. There is a desire of some members for what they expressed as more opportunities for spiritual growth, and I know we talked about how you and Scott have addressed that in the past, and I'm wondering if you could share that, because I think some people don't understand all the opportunities that there have been, and then if there are ideas of how to approach that in the future.
Yeah, so actually the first place I want to start with that is just looping back to what I said about the difference between a developmental and a settled minister. Like, I do think that I'll have more opportunities to really think about that in services than when I'm having to preach about, governance. Again, nothing bad to say about the governance wonks out there, but so I think that shift will impact the way that feels. But Scott and I really have in the last 2 years, because the thing that came up, Cheryl, was 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we did the developmental ministry assessment and changed the aspirations. Was that 2 years ago, right? So the thing that came up 2 years ago was sort of that desire, and so Scott and I developed this big Lives of the Spirit program where we had a themed-based sermon every month, the book group, covenant groups, and a workshop to really try to provide people with lots of opportunities. And we got a lot, more than one people said it was one of the better programs that the congregation has done over the years, and really said some appreciative things about it. I think one of the struggles that we had, and I'm seeing Scott nod his head around this, was that part of that was people had said, we want covenant groups, we want small group ministry for like several years. So Scott went through this effort of creating a really great covenant group program that tied to the Sunday services and really had the opportunity for spiritual growth in them. It was a wonderful program. And, practically nobody participated in it, right? And some of the workshops, were spottily attended, and it seemed to be basically, if it was something that people knew about, like Buddhist meditation, we'd get a lot of group things. But like we had one of the senior monks from the Vedanta Society, which is a big Hindu tradition all throughout the United States. One of the senior monks came, and there were like 30 people from outside the congregation that came, and like 3 members of the congregation that came to that. So we've been struggling to figure out how it is to help people meet, that need. And some of it is publicity. I hope people will sign up to come to the John Clark thing that's happening on November 13th. But some of it, I think maybe people have a different idea of what they're looking for than what we're offering. And I think having a better understanding of that and like what do people mean by spirituality, because actually one of the conversations Scott and I had last week, I'm sorry, Scott, to keep dragging you in this, but you're the other minister, had about this is that, we're operating from models of how people have done things in the past, right? And so like workshops, covenant groups, those have been the ways that, say, from 1985 to 2015, congregations met people's spiritual needs. Well, 2024 is not even 2015, so maybe we really need to rethink about how it is we, because people's needs are changing, but because society is changing, maybe we need to think about providing those, opportunities for spiritual growth differently. And I think one of the exciting things about being at a congregation like FIRSTUU is we have the resources to kind of experiment with that. And so hopefully we can experiment with that and figure that out in a way that works for people. But I think pointing to things that we've done in the past may not actually be what we need to do in the future, just based on the way that y'all, and I don't necessarily mean any of you individually, because I'm looking at some of the people who did show up, were one of the 3 people from the congregation who did show up to those workshops. But, it's not, pointing things people have done in the past is maybe not the way to do things in the future. And so figuring that out, I think, is a real live question.
Thanks. That was a thoughtful answer. The next question, a little bit more on the administrative end of the scale. Wrong measure. What are your thoughts on how to balance the church's personnel resources with supporting the programs, services, and administrative needs of the church such that a healthy workload for our staff is maintained? That's
this might
not
also,
very objective, I know.
What?
That's a bit subjective, I understand.
Well, it also might get me a little bit in trouble, because actually I think that if you were to ask a member of the staff what is the sort of burden, it's much more members of the congregation making on demands of them to provide services for member-led programs than it is programs put on by that are staff-driven. And that's not to say that the congregation shouldn't have member-led programs, but we've tried to be relatively clear about what level of services the staff can provide, and people will get upset when the staff doesn't provide X, Y, and Z, beyond that. And that tends to be really the point at which the weight on the staff feels pretty heavy. Because so for instance, this year, our Future Visions, Future Selves program has less stuff in it. We're only doing 5 workshops. We're not doing the covenant groups because Scott went to halftime, and there's work that the congregation needs to do around Carol's transition away from being the DRE to prepare to have a new director of religious education of some kind. And so we said, as a staff group, okay, we need to actually cut down the level of services that we're providing to the congregation, not in a way that people are going to get really upset about, but in a way that recognizes Scott's only here half-time, so we need to cut down on what we do. But the stretching point has been that actually at the same time, because we're a growing church, and it's a really wonderful thing to be a growing church, the demands on members of the staff from the congregation for member-led programs has continued to increase. So I don't know how to square that circle in a way that doesn't get people very upset, because they do get upset when we're like, yeah, I mean, so the big one actually that people get upset about is Saturday programming, right? Saturday programming. The building is open from 10 to 2 on Saturday, because that is the resources that we have to provide for, that's what our resources.
There's a cost associated with having the building and
Right.
the sexton's here and everything that needs to happen.
Exactly. And at least once a month, somebody gets upset about the fact that they want to have a program at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday it's a great program. It's never like these are terrible programs or any, it's going to bring people to church, it's going to serve the city, it's going to do X, Y, and Z things. And they inevitably get upset with somebody on staff when the staff is like, well, right now, we don't have the resources to keep the building open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Saturdays. If you want to have this program, we're going to either need to figure out how to raise $300 or $400 or whatever it is, or your program group is going to have to come up with it, right? And I mean, we deal with that like probably once a month. So I don't know how to square the circle around that, because I don't want to tell people, no, you can't have programs here, but we also need to communicate this is what we can provide right now. If we have a bigger church and can hire, and it's not cheap. I mean, that to keep the building open Saturday afternoon and evenings is like another $10,000 to $15,000 a year, right? So you got sextons and electricity and all of that stuff. So, if we can come up with that money and decide that there's a real need for it, then that's an option. That may have been too long-winded of an answer, but I feel like I needed to kind of get into the weeds a little bit with some of that stuff.
And it's also this issue of roles and what is the role of the congregation and programs that are led by the congregation and things that are staff-driven.
Yeah.
And we have a very small staff, and they do incredible amounts of work for us. And I always try to tell them I appreciate them for that.
And you can have a program here as a member of the congregation any day of the week, Monday through Friday, until 8:45. So like that, there are lots of opportunities. It's just that's where we're at. And if you want to do one of those programs, you just need to pretty much call the office, say, I have a program that I want to do that's a congregational program. Here's the idea. Here's my thinking around it. Here's how it's going to benefit the church. And, the front office will assign you a room. It's like that's, all that, right? So.
And you can have your own party here. I've had my own birthday party here. You just rent Channing Hall, and it's a lot of fun. We maybe have time for one more.
Sure. That looks good. Yeah, I think so. And this, I've taken some notes, some mental notes from your responses here, but how about we'll draw it a little further and ask, how would you support lay leadership and volunteer involvement in the church? I suppose, how do you already, of course, but how would you in a settled ministry?
I hate to say this, but I think some of that question is actually a board question, because the board is really looking at nurturing congregational leadership right now. And so, what we've done since I've been here is institute things like the Leadership Day that happens every fall that's been very helpful in nurturing leadership. And we've sort of worked with the nominating committee to sort of suggest, here are people who are good for, not the search committee. I did not suggest anybody for the search committee. But who would be
So
good?
you don't like us?
No, I'm just clear about roles, right? So, but working with the nominating committee to say, okay, here are some people you might not know about who would be good board members, right? Who are devoted members of the congregation, who are new, right? And, Scott has been great at recruiting people for things like the pastoral associates who are new to the congregation, or worship associates. Margarita is really great at trying to bring people onto the welcome team. Actually, we have an abundance of riches in volunteers. We have something like 170 active volunteers in congregational life. The issue is not, and this is why I'm sort of directing this back to the board, but not expecting that Cheryl's going to be put on the spot and have to answer this, is that really the issue is kind of a path to leadership. So we have, and if you look at the board versus the congregation, you really see the challenge around this. The board does not reflect the congregation right now. We have a growing younger, growing more diverse congregation. Our board is older and entirely white. And so how does the board invite into leadership people who reflect the congregation rather than continue to sort of have that level of leadership of the congregational life be held by a particular group of people with longer tenures in the congregation? And I can encourage people all I want around stuff like that, but it's really the member-to-member thing that's going to make the big difference in terms of bringing those folks into that level of leadership role. And we don't seem to have an issue with getting newer people involved in the, things like Rebuilding Together Houston, or being on the worship associates, or lots of volunteering at that level. In fact, a lot of them, the Spanish ministry team right now is, I think, all people who have been members of the congregation for less than 2 years. So, that's not where the sticking point is, and that's, I'm happy to talk with you about it, but it's not really a question for me.
Why don't we wrap up and ask you one of those classic interview questions, which is, what didn't we ask that you would like to be asked or to speak about?
So I think that what I would like to say is sort of like why or why not you should think about calling me as a settled minister. If I am called as a settled minister, I'm really going to challenge the congregation to grow into being a pillar congregation for Houston. That is what I'm really going to, I think that is what you've said your mission is. I have clear ideas on why I think that that's important, and that's really what I'm going to push the congregation to do. And that has a different kind of role for the senior minister than sort of, hey, I can call Colin and expect that my question about why are the drapes in the back of the sanctuary purple is going to merit, a long, sustained interview, hour-long conversation, right? So if you want to really try to focus on building a pillar congregation, then I'm the right minister for you. If you want a congregation that is much more inward focused and much more about just the present membership of the congregation and tending to just the needs of the membership of the congregation, which is fine. I wish you all the very, very best in doing that. There's lots of Unitarian Universalist congregations that function that way, and they're wonderful congregations. Not the right minister for you. And so I think that's kind of what I need to say to y'all. Right. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do you want to close?
Yeah, I wanted to thank everyone. Yes, thank you. Thank everyone for coming. Thank you, Reverend Colin, for a very long day on a Sunday. And I wanted to remind people that if you're not going to be here on Sunday or can't remain for the vote, there are absentee ballots that are available. Pass them in to the office, or you can also email them to board@firstuuhouston.org.
The ballots are in the office now. If you need one after this meeting, I will get one for you. You can turn it in today or another time to the office, or you can email, and the email is written on the ballot itself.
Great. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. The vote is next Sunday at 1 p.m. Thank you. Yes. Same bat time, same bat place.
channel.
All right.